Let's dive right into one of the biggest, most profound paradoxes at the very heart of the Christian faith. It's a question that, on the surface, seems to pit two foundational ideas directly against each other: God's clear command against killing, and the core belief that the killing of Jesus is the absolute key to salvation.
I mean, let's just state it plainly. The sixth commandment is crystal clear. You shall not murder. And yet, the central event, the symbol of the entire Christian faith, is a brutal public execution. So, how on earth can an act that seems to fly in the face of God's law be the very thing that fulfills it? It feels like a massive contradiction, right? Well, let's start piecing this puzzle together.
To start unraveling this, we have to go right back to the beginning, to the law itself. And it turns out the way we might read that commandment today is missing a really crucial distinction that was obvious in the original language. So our first step is all about understanding murder versus sacrifice.
Okay, this is so important. The specific Hebrew word used in that commandment is ratzach. Now, this isn't some blanket term for any and all killing, not at all. Its meaning is much more precise. Ratzach refers to unlawful, premeditated murder, the kind of killing that's driven by malice or revenge or selfish gain. This distinction is the very first key to unlocking the paradox because it shows us that the law itself has built-in categories.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The Bible itself makes this distinction super clear. The same Torah that's the first 5 books of the Old Testament where God's law is laid out, the same set of books that prohibits ratzach also sets up other forms of killing. Look at this. Capital punishment was required for certain crimes. Wars were at times commanded by God. And, most importantly for what we're talking about, the entire sacrificial system was established by God, a system that absolutely required the death of innocent animals. This proves that not all killing was seen as the same thing. There was forbidden murder, and then there were other forms of killing that were legally and religiously sanctioned.
And this verse from Leviticus gets to the very heart of it. God says, "I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement." Atonement, that's just a word for making things right, for covering the debt of sin. So you see, the death of an innocent substitute wasn't some human idea that God just kind of tolerated. It was his own provision. It was his design from the very beginning. The concept that an innocent death could bring life was woven right into the fabric of the law. Okay, so we've established a clear difference between forbidden murder and sanctioned sacrifice. That's a huge first step. But that brings us to what might be the most critical shift in perspective in this entire explainer. Was Jesus just a helpless victim of a terrible crime? Or was something entirely different going on? This next part is all about that question: victim or volunteer? And the incredible thing is, we don't have to guess at the answer. Jesus addresses it himself, head on. Just listen to these words from the Gospel of John. He explicitly says that his life isn't being taken from him against his will. He says, "I lay it down of my own accord." He claims total and complete authority over his own life and death. I mean, that single statement just completely flips the script, doesn't it? It reframes the entire event from a passive execution to an active, powerful act of self-giving. And he doesn't just say it once. He explains the reason behind it. He defines his entire mission, his whole purpose for being here, in these terms. He came to serve, and the ultimate act of that service was to give his life as a ransom. A ransom is a price paid to set someone free. He saw his death not as a tragic accident that ended his ministry, but as the very climax and purpose of it. It was a mission he chose.
So here's the crucial point. When you factor in what Jesus himself said, the narrative does a 180. The crucifixion stops being a story about what angry men did to Jesus, and it becomes a story about what God, in the person of Jesus, willingly did for all of us. The focus shifts from murder to a divine, voluntary self-offering. Now, this whole idea of a willing, divine sacrifice didn't just come out of nowhere. In fact, it was the ultimate fulfillment of patterns and prophecies that were established centuries earlier. And this is where all the puzzle pieces from the Old Testament start snapping into place. Let's dig into that connection, fulfilling the blueprint. I absolutely love this analogy of a blueprint. Think about it. A blueprint has all the designs, the patterns, the specifications for the final building. Well, the source material explains that the entire Old Testament sacrificial system, with all its detailed rituals and laws, was exactly that. It was a spiritual blueprint. And Jesus' death wasn't a mistake or a deviation from the plan. It was the final, magnificent structure being built perfectly according to that ancient design. Now, while there are lots of patterns we could look at, like the Passover lamb, the source material points to one specific ritual as the most detailed and most precise blueprint of all. We're going to zoom in on it,
because when you see the parallels, it is just stunning. We're talking about the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, from the book of Leviticus.
Okay, so let's walk through this amazing ancient ceremony. Picture this. Once a year, the high priest would go through this whole purification process to enter God's presence. First, and this is key, he had to offer a sacrifice for his own sin. Then, he'd take 2 identical goats. One was sacrificed, and its blood was brought into the most holy place to satisfy God's justice against sin. The other goat, the famous scapegoat, had all the sins of the people confessed over it, and then it was sent out into the wilderness to be lost forever, symbolically removing their guilt. So you have 2 goats, each showing a different part of what atonement means.
And this is where it all comes together. This is just incredible. Look how the 2 separate roles of those goats are perfectly fulfilled in the single work of Jesus. What took 2 animals in the blueprint, 1 person completes in reality. Like the first goat, his blood satisfies God's justice. And like the second goat, the scapegoat, he bears our sins and removes our guilt, literally suffering outside the gate of Jerusalem. The shadow, the blueprint, had to be repeated every single year. But the fulfillment? That was a perfect once-for-all event. Done. Forever. And just when you think the parallels can't get any more profound, they do. See, the blueprint required a priest to offer the sacrifice. But in the final fulfillment, Jesus isn't just the offering. He isn't just both goats in one. He's also the one making the offering. He's the high priest.
And this is what makes him the perfect high priest. Think about it. Unlike the human priests, he was sinless, so he didn't need to offer a sacrifice for himself first. His single sacrifice of himself was totally sufficient for all people, for all time, so it never, ever needs to be repeated. And he didn't walk into a man-made temple on earth. He entered heaven itself to present his own offering directly to God. He is both the offerer and the offerer.
So this brings us to the final piece of our puzzle. It's that last nagging question. If this was all part of God's intricate master plan, fulfilling an ancient blueprint, what do we do with the people who actually carried it out? The ones who hammered in the nails. This last section gives us the final resolution, and it's all about sovereignty and guilt.
Let's just ask the question directly, because you're probably thinking it. Does God's overarching plan somehow absolve human beings of their responsibility? If it was all preordained to happen, how can anyone be blamed for their part in it? It sounds like we've run into yet another paradox.
Well, the Bible's answer is fascinating. It holds both truths in perfect tension at the same time. Just look at this one sentence from the book of Acts. Notice the 2 parts. It happened according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, and you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. God's sovereign plan and human guilt are stated side by side as equally true. There's no attempt to water one down for the other. It just affirms them both.
And this principle is shown beautifully elsewhere in the Bible. Think of that incredible moment when Joseph confronts his brothers who sold him into slavery years before. He looks at them and says, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." It's the same idea. Human beings act out of their own intentions. In the case of the crucifixion, evil ones, and they are 100% morally responsible for those actions. And yet, a sovereign God is powerful enough to weave even those sinful human actions into his greater, good, redemptive purpose without ever erasing their guilt.
Ultimately, we can bring it all right back to Jesus' own perspective. After his resurrection, he explained to his followers that what happened to him wasn't some horrible tragedy or a plan that went wrong. He called it a scriptural necessity, something that was foreseen and written about from the very beginning of the scriptures in the books of Moses and all the prophets.
So the paradox resolves. When you put all the pieces together, you see that Jesus' death was a sacrifice, not a rat sack murder. He was a willing offering, not a helpless victim. It was the ultimate fulfillment of ancient God-given blueprints, and it was God's perfect, sovereign plan working through the guilty actions of human hands.
And that leads us to this powerful summarizing thought that just wraps it all up. The crucifixion isn't a story about God contradicting his own law. It's the story of the one who gave the law becoming the one who fulfilled it perfectly on behalf of everyone else.
And so we'll end with this thought to chew on. The cross is where the law's demands for perfect justice are met, and at the exact same time, it's presented as the ultimate demonstration of God's love for humanity. So what does it mean if the greatest act of love in history was also the ultimate act of justice? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.